we're going to talk about PHP loops. Okay, basically in this section you will learn about how to repeat a code by using loops, because when it comes to loops or looping, often maybe you want to write a code and you want to say you want the same block of code to run over and over, maybe a certain number of times. So instead of adding several almost the same code all over or equal code lines in a script, we can use loops. So loops are used to execute the same block of code again and again, as long as the certain condition is actually it's true. So the basic idea behind a loop is to automate the repetitive tasks within a program just to save time and effort. Now, PHP does support 4 different types of loops. We've got a while loop, so it loops through a block of code as long as the condition is specified if value is true. And then for a do while, the block of code is executed once and then the condition is evaluated. But if the condition is true, the statement is repeated as long as the specified condition returns true. And then we've got the for loop. So with the for loop, it loops through a block of code until the counter reaches a specified number. And the last loop that we're going to look at is the for each. So it loops through a block of code for each element in an array. Okay. I think the for each we will use it mostly, especially when we working with databases and all of that. Maybe we want to loop through at least a collection that we have in the database. Then we can look at using the for each. All right, now let's go ahead and look at the while loop. All right, so what I'm gonna do, we will just create a new file here. I'm going to close this one, and this will add as loops. .php. Right, so let's go ahead and add a PHP structure there. So the first loop that we're going to look at is the while loop. So remember that loops through a code. It loops through a code. Let me just quickly do this. There we go. All right, so it loops through a code, a block of code, loops through, I think I might type this down, loops through a block of code as long as the specified condition is true. Specified condition is true. Returns through. Okay. All right, so let's quickly do so we can do something like I can create a variable I, and I'm gonna put 0 on it. So I can create a variable I and put 0 on it. No, we can maybe put 0 on it, and then I'm gonna say while I, variable I, is less or equals to 5. Less or equal to 5. We know that I is 0. Then we're gonna echo I, right? And then we also gonna, let me just do this and concatenate with the br otherwise it's going to look kind of weird. All right, and then we're going to increment I, so that so now just to explain this a little bit, we have I equals to 0, so this is to initialize the loop, so this is also known as a loop counter. Now meaning variable I is set to start the value to 0, okay, and we have this, which is the condition. So this is to continue the loop as long as I is less than or equals to 5, okay. And then we have the increment here. This means increment the loop counter by the value of 1 for each iteration. So as long as I is less than 5, then we want to increment that or put 1 on I, and then it becomes to 0. It becomes 1, okay, for iteration. So all right, so let's go ahead and see this one in action. So what I'm going to do, just going to open the browser here, and I'm going to go localhost, localhost basics. Yeah, like it's still in my history, so it's easy for me to find it. And if I go over loops, and then I can see that it continued to loop through as long as I is less than 5, is less or equals to 5, and then it's going to stop once it evaluates to false. All right, so that is the example of the while loop. So that is an example of the while loop. Now let's look at the do while loop now. So let's do this. So now we're going to look at the do while. Basically the do while, it's going to loops through a block of code, as we explained before. A block of code at least once, as we explained before. So it loops through a block of code at least once, and then it then repeats the loop as long as the specified condition returns true, and then returns true as long as the conditions returns true. I think I'm just gonna echo something here, like maybe in HR. All right. So let me I can take a variable A, and I'm gonna put 0 on it. So I'm gonna say do, and then echo variable A, and increment variable A. So now you put the condition at the bottom. So you put the condition at the bottom. So we can say while variable A is less or equal to 5. So now if we look at that and sort of refresh, and then we can see that the code is looping through. Okay, but the only difference is that it's at least it's gonna run once. It's gonna run the code once before it can, and then repeats as long as the condition returns true. Okay, and so here we can always concatenate with BR as well. BR. All right, so if we look at that and let's remove, that's better. All right, so that is the do while loop. Now let's look at the what is the difference between the while and the do while? The while loop differs from the do while in one important way. Okay, with a while loop, the condition to be evaluated is tested at the beginning of each iteration. So if the condition expression evaluates to false, then the loop will never be executed. Okay, with the do while loop, on the other hand, the loop will always be executed at once. So even if the condition expression is false, because the condition is evaluated at the end of the loop iteration rather than in the beginning. Okay, now let's quickly look at the for loop. Okay, so we're going to look at the for loop. You know what, I just want to echo AP in HR here because I want to separate these things. The for loop, so with the for loop, it repeats a block of code as long as a certain condition is met. Certain condition is met. So it's actually used to execute a block of code for a number of times. All right. Now, this will be something like for let's use variable x is 0, and as long as x is less or equal to 4, then we gonna increment x. And we're just gonna echo variable x concatenate with the BR, of course. All right, so what we have here, first we have the initializer. So this is used to initialize the counter variables, and it has to be evaluated once unconditionally before the first execution of the body of the loop. All right, and then we have followed by the condition. So in the beginning of each iteration, the condition is evaluated. If it evaluates to true, the loop continues and the nested statements are actually executed. But if it evaluates to false, then the execution of the loop ends. Okay, and then finally we have the increment. It updates the loop counter with a new value. So it is evaluated at the end of each iteration. All right, so we have this example. In this example, we have an initializer that starts from 0, and then the loop is continued until x is less than or equals to 4, and then the variable x will increase by 1 each time the loop runs. Okay, so let's look at that in action. So if I just click there, then we can see. Okay, so that is a for loop. Now suppose, how can we use all right, now let's quickly look at the for each example. Let's look at the for each loop. All right, so I just want to paste that echo there, that hr there. So we have the for each loop. So that for each loops through a block of code for each element in an array, array. But the for each loop only works on arrays and is used to loop through each key value pair. Now, for every loop iteration, the value of the current array element is assigned to the value and the value that will provide, and the array pointer is moved by 1 until it reaches the last array element. Suppose we have an array like this. Maybe we've got cars. So maybe I have an array like this array, and there we'll have maybe I've got BMW, and I've got Benz, maybe I've got Mazda, and then I can have Toyota. Okay, now I can, just to loop through that, I can just use for each, and I'm gonna just say cars as car. So meaning each value in cars is assigned to car. Okay, so each value in cars is assigned to car, and we can just echo car, and of course with a line break. So I'm going to concatenate with a line break, br. Right, so if we check that, and then we can see all the cars. All right, so that's all that you need to know about loops. Right, let's meet again on the next lesson.